Before we go deeper, notice what makes the most dangerous money habit keeping you broke so misleading at first glance. Most people see the surface story and stop there. The value of this chapter is that it changes the lens, because once the frame is cleaner, the rest of the topic becomes much easier to understand honestly. When people talk about bad money habits, they usually point at obvious things: coffee, shopping, food delivery, nice vacations. Those can matter, but they are often symptoms, not the root pattern. The more dangerous habit is vaguer and harder to criticize because it looks normal. It is living without clear assignment. Money arrives and then mood, routine, and convenience decide where it goes. That is the part many people miss. Unassigned money does not wait patiently for your priorities to catch up. It gets claimed. Bills take some, lifestyle takes some, friction takes some. Then the leftovers are expected to become savings, investing, and long-term progress. By the time that moment comes, there is rarely enough force left to build anything serious. This habit is especially dangerous because it feels harmless. It is the default setting in many households. Nobody decided to be careless. There is no visible crisis most months. Life just keeps moving, and money keeps responding to the loudest thing in front of it. The absence of clear intention gets mistaken for normal adulthood. A decent paycheck can hide this pattern for a long time. If the salary is strong enough, the system does not immediately collapse. That creates false confidence. People think they are doing fine because the account never fully empties. But underneath that surface, the structure may still be weak. Good money is coming in, yet very little is being turned into lasting ownership. That is why many good earners still feel broke in a confusing way. They can pay bills, cover normal life, and occasionally spend freely, yet they do not feel safer year by year. The reason is often simple. Income is arriving, but almost none of it is being captured into reserves, productive assets, or lower future dependence. Motion is happening without accumulation. So the point is not to become weirdly obsessed with every tiny purchase. That misses the real lesson. The dangerous habit is not the latte. It is the absence of structure. Once structure is missing, thousands of ordinary decisions start reinforcing the same outcome: a life financed month to month instead of a system strengthened year to year. That opening distinction may sound subtle, but it is doing most of the heavy lifting. Once the frame changes, the rest of the story stops feeling random. You begin to see that what looked ordinary on the surface was already shaping the financial result underneath. Now we move from headline to mechanism. This is where the topic stops feeling like a slogan and starts behaving like a real system. Once the mechanism is visible, the later outcomes stop looking mysterious and start looking like the natural result of specific incentives and habits. One of the clearest effects of financial drift is what happens to raises. Instead of becoming a wealth event, they quietly become a lifestyle event. Better apartment, better subscriptions, better travel, better flexibility in the short term. None of those are automatically wrong, but when the whole raise gets absorbed that way, the future never gets a meaningful vote. Compounding needs a gap. It needs some part of the money stream to escape present consumption and stay invested long enough to grow. When everything remains available to the current version of you, that gap never forms. People then conclude that investing is impossible for them, when in reality, the system never carved out a lane for it to happen. Financial drift also makes emergencies feel heavier. If there is no deliberate reserve, every disruption gets funded from reactive scrambling. That creates expensive decisions: debt, forced sales, bad timing, or deeper stress than the event itself required. A strong money system does not stop emergencies. It keeps them from changing the whole direction of the year. Another problem is that drift trains the mind to believe the answer is always more income. More income helps, but without assignment, it often just feeds a larger version of the same leak. That's why some people double their earnings and still never feel structurally safe. The container never improved, only the flow rate did. When no clear plan exists, emotion naturally becomes the planner. Stress buys relief, boredom buys stimulation, success buys reward, insecurity buys appearance. None of that feels irrational in the moment because there is no stronger system already waiting to guide the money somewhere else. The lack of assignment quietly gives emotion full authority. That is the cruel part. People stuck in drift are not inactive. They are financially busy all the time, paying, adjusting, reacting, optimizing, worrying. But the busyness does not turn into proportionate progress. The system expends effort without building much strength, and over years, that mismatch becomes one of the biggest sources of private frustration. Once the mechanism is visible, a lot of confusing money behavior suddenly makes sense. It stops looking like chaos and starts looking like the predictable result of time horizon, incentives, and the way people position capital under pressure. This is the point where the cost becomes real. Up to now, the idea can still sound abstract, but Chapter 3 forces the issue into ordinary life. That matters because financial damage is usually underestimated until it gets translated into trade-offs, pressure, and lost future options. Smart people fall into this because the pattern can look mature. Bills are handled. Nothing outrageous is happening. The account is active and life is moving. That feels responsible enough. But responsibility is not the same as architecture. A financially adult life is not just one where money gets spent competently. It is one where money also gets positioned intentionally. The environment makes this worse. Modern consumer systems are designed to capture unassigned money beautifully. One-click payments, subscriptions, financing, app-based convenience, and constant nudges remove the pause that used to exist between desire and purchase. If your money does not already have a destination, the market will gladly invent one for it. Another reason is that comfort feels like safety. If your life gets easier, your brain assumes you are doing well financially. But comfort can also be funded in ways that quietly weaken the future. The system feels better now, while resilience stays thin. That distinction is one of the hardest and most important to learn. It is also hard to escape a pattern you were never shown how to replace. Most people were not taught to run money through buckets, rules, targets, or investment lanes. They were taught to pay obligations and avoid obvious disaster. So drift becomes normal, not because people are lazy, but because the better operating system never became visible early enough. Then social comparison adds pressure. If everyone around you upgrades quickly, delayed gratification starts to feel like deprivation instead of strategy. That pushes more money into visible categories and less into quiet ones like reserves, debt reduction, and investing. The drift looks collective, which makes it harder to recognize as a problem. And finally, convenience always beats intention when intention is vague. If the long-term plan lives only in your head, the path of least resistance will keep winning. That is why the answer to financial drift is not more guilt. It is better defaults, better containers, better automation, better rules that do the hard work before willpower gets tired. This is why the damage is usually larger than the headline suggests. It is rarely just a number problem. It becomes a freedom problem, a margin problem, and eventually a future options problem. That is what makes the cost so easy to ignore early and so frustrating later. At this stage, the useful move is reframe rather than blame. The goal is not to admire the problem or panic about it. The goal is to replace a weak money model with one that produces better choices consistently once real life gets involved. The cleanest reframe is simple. Every dollar needs a job before it arrives in your hands, not after it sits around, not after the month becomes stressful. Before, some money is for living, some is for protection, some is for building. When each role is clear, drift has fewer places to hide. This is why financially strong people often seem boring. They pre-decide the amount for spending, the amount for reserves, the amount for investing, the amount for debt. That pre-decision matters because it changes the emotional sequence. Instead of money being fully available and then reduced later, only the spending portion remains available in the first place. A lot of people try to fix drift with motivation. They promise themselves they will just be more disciplined next month. That usually fades because the structure stays the same. Buckets work better than vibes. Once the buckets exist, behavior gets easier because each dollar has less ambiguity surrounding it. Automation makes this even stronger. The more your system depends on daily discipline, the more likely daily life will beat it. When transfers happen automatically, progress becomes less exposed to stress, fatigue, and impulse. That is why automation is not laziness. It is intelligent friction management. Something else changes when you stop drifting. Money starts to feel less dramatic. Fewer surprises, fewer guilt spirals, fewer debates with yourself about whether you are doing enough. That calmness is not accidental. It is what happens when the system begins carrying more of the psychological load than your mood does. And that brings us to the deeper truth. Wealth is usually built in quiet margins that were protected before the world could spend them for you. It is not just about earning. It is about interception. the ability to catch money early and redirect it toward ownership before everyday life converts it into maintenance. Most financial progress accelerates only after people stop asking the wrong question and start organizing money around the right one. Better framing usually arrives before better outcomes. Now the idea needs to become operational. Insight only matters if it changes what the next dollars do, what the next rule becomes, or how the system behaves the next time life gets noisy. That is where strong financial content separates itself from interesting commentary. If you want to break this habit, start by looking backward without drama. Review the last 90 days. Where did the money actually go? Not where you hoped it went. What categories quietly expanded? Which transfers never happened? The goal is not shame. The goal is accuracy. Financial clarity usually begins with honest pattern recognition. Then, build 3 simple buckets: live, protect, build. Live handles current life, protect handles reserves and known near-term obligations, build handles the future. That basic separation alone is enough to expose how much money has been pretending to belong nowhere while actually funding everything but long-term progress. Once the buckets exist, move the build money first. Even a modest amount matters if it happens before the month starts arguing with you. This is the step that breaks drift because it changes the order of events. The future stops waiting politely for leftovers and starts receiving capital as a real priority. Next, create a simple ceiling for lifestyle growth. When income rises, decide in advance how much of that increase will strengthen the system before any upgrade is allowed. That one rule protects you from turning every financial improvement into a bigger version of the same fragile setup. Then review monthly, not emotionally, not randomly, and not only after mistakes. A regular review keeps the system visible enough to correct while the drift is still small. That matters because most financial problems become expensive only after many months of being ignored. So the most dangerous money habit keeping people broke is not one flashy mistake. It is drift. Money arriving without a job, then disappearing into whatever speaks first. Fix that, and a lot of other money problems start getting easier. If this changed how you think about money, subscribe. We publish 3 videos every week. That is the whole WealthLogic point. Money gets easier to respect once it is organized on purpose. The people who win long-term usually are not responding better to one moment. They are running a better system every month, even when nothing dramatic seems to be happening.